Hey, Bomb Squad. If you're a comedian or a podcaster looking for an affordable website solution with a modern look, then we recommend Puck's Hub. With a Puck's Hub website, you can set up your new website in minutes with easy-to-use pre-built templates. Puck's Hub websites are customizable and can easily be integrated with other platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. The best part? Puck's Hub plans are only $5 per month. We use Puck's Hub for our website at the Art of Bombing podcast, and we think you should too. That's why we've partnered with Puck's Hub to offer listeners a free 60-day trial. Head over to puckshub.com to subscribe and use promo code AOBPOD at checkout for your 60-day free trial, and then pay only $5 per month after that. Take your career to the next level with your own Puck's Hub website today.
Dan Bublitz Comedy Productions.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to an all-new episode of the Art of Bombing presents Between Bombs Callbacks, where Josh and I call back the most recent episode. In this week's episode, we are calling back episode 278 with Haley Raven. Haley made her second appearance. This was her second appearance on the podcast. We had her on, I forget which episode off the top of my head. I looked it up. I have it written down somewhere. I got to find it. It's here somewhere, though.
Yeah. We may need your help, folks, in order to determine what episode that was. You know, we need avid listeners.
We do. We need that. We need the avid listeners. And what I was thinking about doing actually is I was thinking about actually re-releasing the episode that she was on, the original one, so people can listen to the original episode and the new episode. I thought that would be a fun thing. So if you're listening to this now, you probably already know that we already released it, and this makes no sense. You're like, why are you talking about thinking about doing it? You've already done it. That's because we record in the future.
We do. Now, here's the thing, Dan. We have to give them not one, but two pauses to go back and listen to both shows.
We do. So
here's a minute, folks. Just take a second and
episode 71. That's the episode.
Well played. That's reaching back.
That's why we're re-releasing it. I don't think it's on the internet now. I'm gonna have to So re-release episode 71. Here's your chance. Go listen to it. Okay, now.
All right, man. Wow.
Yeah, now that you've listened to episode 271, the re-release, now go back and we're going to pause so you can go listen to episode 278, the second appearance. Okay, now you're all caught up. Now everything we're about to say is going to make sense.
Yes. You went back in time. We appreciate you going back in time.
We had to do a double pause, double tap.
That's right. You got in the DeLorean. You went 88 miles per hour. You listened to a couple episodes. I don't know. You made Abraham Lincoln, maybe. You got in a phone booth. However you decide to travel through time is up to you.
Exactly.
But on this episode, hey, look, I think it ties off to some good themes for comics. One of those things was, Haley tells a very entertaining story about, how she had some bachelorette party revelers who were to be, I agree with her, probably on their, I don't know, 5th or 6th bachelorette party, same bachelorette, who knows. But stuff got reality show trashy during that story. And I thought that sort of brought up a point where if comics are going to venues to do shows, there's a two-way operation, right? Like we're expected to do something, but so is the venue. We should
Absolutely. It's
talk
supposed to be a
about what
partnership.
a partnership. So let's talk about the venue first, Dan. When you go do a show, what are you expecting? Let's start with the table stakes. Like we shouldn't even have to mention what.
Well, for me, it depends. I mean, because there is a negotiation part that you do up top, and that's where you need to lay out so all the expectations are there. You need to ask questions right away. First thing I always ask when I'm reaching out to a venue about a show, do they have any kind of a stage or sound equipment, light equipment, any of that stuff? Because ideally, if you're looking for a good venue, ideally you want to do a show in a venue that has all those things already. So then
Yeah.
that's one less thing you can take off your producing plate. Unfortunately, a lot of venues these days, unless they're an actual music venue, typically don't have that stuff built in because a lot of shows now, take place at like coffee shops and breweries and some of these alternate type, untraditional venues, and you have to provide all that stuff. But number one, that's what I always want to know right away: sound, good, and not just sound, but good sound. You have to really explain that because when you approach a venue and you ask them if they have sound equipment and they have a guitar amp, they're gonna say yes because they're gonna,
Yes.
oh yeah, we can
They have
plug a
no
mic
idea.
into that because they have no idea exactly. They don't really know what an actual PA system is or a sound system. To them, it's any speaker that they can plug a microphone into,
Yes.
and that's not the case. That's not always good for comedy.
Right. Yeah, I think you're bringing up an excellent point. We got to have that. And what I think you're describing, I would call less of an expectation and more of a hope.
Yeah,
Right?
well, yeah,
Like,
exactly. You're right. It's a hope. That one's a
and
hope, not necessarily an expectation.
so I wrote down two expectations when I was listening to the episode with Haley. And I think Haley probably had these things expected as well in the story that she tells. Number one, obeying the law, meaning this particular venue is being lawful in terms of allowing people into the venue. Number one, people who are not, inebriated beyond a legal definition, where they should even be allowed to be
Yeah.
there. The number of drinks that they're being served is below a legal limit or precedent. And the people that they're letting in are of age.
Hmm.
And, for example, they don't let 6 foot tall 13-year-old girls in there. And, so that's a piece of it, right?
Oh,
Second
yeah,
thing,
absolutely.
second thing was they have some regard for the performer's personal safety and
Hmm.
take measures in order to mitigate any sort of inconsistency or lack thereof, right?
Yeah.
So there was a moment in her story where she legitimately feels unsafe and she has to take she
Well,
brings
took it into her
a
own.
taser.
Yeah.
Yeah, she
She.
brings a weapon on stage because she's afraid for her life, and look,
Yeah.
yeah, it. So those two things, Dan, I would say I'm not going to call ahead of time and say I might call ahead of time and ask about the sound, the lighting. I might show up, turn some chairs around. What I'm not going to do is call and say, hey, as a venue, do you have your shit together?
Yeah, right. However, I just want to interject a little bit here. If you're producing a show and you go to a venue and you agree to do a show there, you can't just always expect that they're going to do these things. You
Mm-hmm.
you hope, again, I mean, you can
Yeah,
expect that the first part of what you're saying, yes, you can expect that they, in order for people to get into their establishment, it should be under legal circumstances. If they're way too drunk to be in there, they shouldn't be allowed in there. They should be cut off if they're being crazy. And, all the things you said up there are true. But when it comes to the performer's safety, that is partially on the venue. But you, as a producer, also have the power to do something. And I
yeah,
feel like in her situation, whoever was producing the show, whoever was involved with running the show, had complete disregard as well for the performers. And,
yeah,
while you expect the venue to take care of that, if they don't, then you are responsible. You can still take care of it. You can go up and approach the rude the rude and rowdy people and say, "Hey, you're being disrespectful," And then if they get, belligerent with you and, you feel threatened, then you should then take it to the venue. And if the venue doesn't do anything, then you don't want to do any more shows there.
Yeah,
That's when you have to terminate this partnership because then
yeah.
it is not a partnership.
I think
But
that's a yeah. You just built a great bridge to the second part of this, which is, there are things we have to do to help the venue know how to run a proper show. I think that's a perfect lead off example of that, which is they don't necessarily maybe they haven't done a comedy show and they don't
yep,
know what happens when guests get unruly, or if someone, maybe it's more minor than that, right? Maybe
yep,
it's somebody's talking to the comics and there's two in the table conversations are too loud. Sure, I agree 100%. Having been a producer a number of times, I always step in and say, "Hey, you guys need to shut up," or I'll go up on stage between acts and try to get some crowd control to
yep.
happen. Um, or more logistical things like we can't see the performers, or let's make it darker in the house, move the chairs closer together, make sure people don't sit way back here, get the TVs turned off. There are things that they don't necessarily think about.
No, exactly, because they're, if they've especially if they've never done a show before, and you're, a lot of what you mentioned are things that will happen in a bar. That's a bar show where you come in and you get an agreement with a bar to do a show there, but they've never done comedy there because they're a bar that they're just there to sell drinks and food and hope and let people come watch sports or whatever it might be. And all those points you made are great examples of things that you need to remember to kind of to do, especially as the show producer. If you want to if you want your show to be successful, you need to do those things. And again, this goes back to the partnership. If you approach a venue and you give them all this information and they refuse, because I've been seeing situations for people where the bar will still leave the TVs on, and
Yeah.
the show producer will be like, "We need the TVs off," and they're like, "Nah, that's not
Nah,
happening." And
it's game 7. Yeah.
yeah, or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's why, doing comedy in sports bars isn't a great it's
Oh,
never great because
yeah. Right. And so if you look at it from the owner's perspective, yeah, I have some comedy that's going to be going on. A lot of times they see comedy as like hiring a cover band to play some tunes,
yep.
and they don't realize that it's not an ambient art form. It's something that requires the attention to be successful, the attention of the entire space. And so when you approach them about turning TVs off, or this other activity that's happening simultaneously now needs to stop in support of me and the show, they get defensive because they're trying to protect the revenue coming in from the people buying
Yep.
drinks and doing this other
Absolutely.
thing. So unfortunately, that can leave some comics in a pretty tight spot. That's happened to me for sure. And I think it's about, like Dan, you brought up earlier, there's certain things from a contractual standpoint. Hey, when I'm going to work with you, I require certain things to happen. So it's probably a good idea, I think you'd agree, to talk about certain things ahead of time.
Absolutely. I think that 100%. That's what I would say. This is all stuff. If you're going to be a show producer and run shows, these are all things you should be talking about and thinking about up front and negotiating when you're doing your initial negotiations. Because if when you're doing this negotiating and you say, "Hey, well, one of the things I require during my show, all these TVs have to be off." And if the venue is like, "Oh yeah, that's not happening," right there's a good indicator that you don't want to work with that venue, and then you're saving yourself because now you're not going to put on a show that comics are going to have a terrible experience, and you're going to have a
Right.
terrible experience, and the venue's going to have a terrible experience because everybody's fighting because the TVs are still on,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. So I think, yeah, right up front you need to that's why I think having a written contract of sorts is important to lay out, this is what we do. And then if you give them a contract and they sign it but they don't actually read it, I mean, legally, you probably can't do a whole lot. You're not going to be able to take them to court for not turning off the TVs,
Yeah,
but that's also
totally.
another indicator that they're probably not a good partner to work with because they didn't actually read the contracts.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I
It's
think
unprofessionalism is what it ends up being.
right. And people listening to this podcast, I think what we have to do for them as the hosts is to try to take them as far as we can, right? Like nobody, we can't really take them all the way to the mattresses of
Nope.
legal action, but I think we've done a decent job so far of creating a list, and it's probably worth going back over that, right? So,
Yep.
if I'm going to come do a show, my expectations are, and let's just start going down it, and we'll work together to try to fill the whole thing in, Dan. So, my personal safety and those of my comics are guaranteed.
Yep.
We you're obeying the law, and you're abiding to all the things that you're supposed to abide by when it comes to serving alcohol, letting people on in the premises, and all those different types of things to mitigate distractions to the show. Also, you have good sound where everyone can hear me performing. This typically means that we need a microphone stand, speakers. We have enough seats for the tickets that we're going to sell. The seats are all facing the stage, and preferably in a slightly safe but tightly packed orientation where
Yep.
people can have a good time.
Yeah, got to make sure there's people can walk through, because that's one thing I will say that I find annoying is when they pack a room so tight. Like I want a good packed room, but when it's so packed you can't even walk to the stage. That's and if you can't walk to the stage, that means people can't get up really and move around, and servers can't get in there, and that's just unsafe for everybody. Somebody's gonna get hurt.
Yes.
Especially when there's alcohol involved.
Right. So
that's an accident waiting to happen.
Safety, law, sound, lighting, and logistics. Right.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Venues, I've seen venues go, you know what? Let's put the performer right in front of the front door. Right. Like there are things that, that's not illegal. I mean, maybe from a fire standpoint it is, but it's not something that is going to hurt anybody, but at the same time, it's not good for the show, especially when the door chimes every time someone opens it, which has been a situation I've been in before.
And it's funny that you say that, because I don't remember the exact guest or the episode, but I do remember that was the bombing story that was told, and it was where they were in a venue.
Must have been at my show.
And the stage was at the front door. Now, it was in a bar, but the stage was right next to the door. Every time somebody came in, like same thing with when they put a stage, the performing area close to where the bathrooms are. So there's always people walking to and from. Definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But
so that's
go ahead.
I was going to say, I was going to put a button on those thoughts. I think that's if you're taking notes, those are the 5 or 6 things to think about using to help your venue get prepared for a show.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to add this. When you go in and you're producing a show, remember, you're the expert, and you need to make sure that they know that. You're the one that has done comedy. They have not. That's why they need to be listening to your recommendations. If you say putting the stage by the front door is not good, can we do, but also don't be rude about it. Make sure you're being professional and offer alternative solutions. If you go into the room and they're saying, well, we usually put the performer here and it's by the front door, look at the room and say, oh, well, what about this corner? Comedy just isn't good if there's so many distractions, and people walking in and out are going to be a distraction. Can we try it over here and try to talk them into that? Because again, you're the expert. So, and make sure you remind them of that. But again, professionally.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point.
All right. That's going to do it for this week's Callbacks episode. We'll be back next week with all new episode of The Art of Bombing. And next Thursday, we'll be back with an all new Callbacks episode. So until then, you guys have a great weekend.
This has been a Dan Bublitz comedy production. Raw.